officially recording this session, just so that everyone knows. It will be available at some point up on our website. Welcome, everyone, again. My name is Lisa Lavinia, and I am the Vice President of Business Development and Sales here at VSys. And one of the things that we've been working on at VSys is really helping our customers not just with how to use our product technically, but also how to manage non-technical aspects of volunteer management. And on that note, we've brought together some experts in volunteer management to you about different topics each month. So I am going to turn this over to Jared, who is going to lead today's discussion. I am also, before I do that, Jared, I am going to state that we do use the chat boxes a lot in this, and we will be unmuting you to speak and share ideas. We do really love to have interactive sessions with you, so you can ask your questions, but also share with each other the wonderful things that you are doing. When you use the chat, I ask that you make sure that you are not just chatting with the host, but you are chatting with all panelists and presenters, or with everyone, so that the different panelists can see your topics as well as me. Jared, I am turning it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I just want to welcome everyone as well. I know we have folks from all over the country and from a number of different sectors or different types of organizations, I should say. And I know the last few calls we have a large majority of hospitals and healthcare facilities. I'm going to guess that that's the case this time as well. Nevertheless, we'll try very hard to make sure that we're speaking to a broader nonprofit audience or a broader audience of volunteer managers. You can see the bios up on the screen, so I'm not going to take a bunch of time to introduce everyone. I will thank both Joan and Dana for participating. You've got two of the best experts in the country on this topic joining the call right now, so we're excited to have the discussion go on. As Lisa said, it is an interactive discussion. I will be kind of managing a lot of the questions in the chat. Of course, several other looking at the chat box and monitoring that. So if you have a question and it's a burning question and it passed by in the chat, you're welcome to send it to me directly to Jared McCannell, and that might get my attention quicker. So go ahead and move right on. And Lisa, I don't know, do I have controls to move the slides, or should I just say slide? Great. Now I've actually.
I think you need to tell me when to move them.
Great. So a couple of things that we want to clarify. We know that leaders of volunteers should be at the table for your organization. This is really important because a lot of times decisions are made, and working with volunteers is something that's not thought of until after the fact. When decisions about programming or other aspects that you could potentially use volunteers for, those should be considered from the get-go. And if you or your immediate supervisor or someone representing your program isn't part of that inner circle, that's one thing we want to talk about, is how to kind of penetrate that and push those messages up. We also realize that everyone wants to be heard. It's important, and it can be challenging when you're working in a bureaucracy or a system that's really siloed. And so those are things that we know that you're going through already. Slide. Thanks, Lisa. So one concept, this is from Dana, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it right over to Dana and let you elaborate on these concepts. But these are all kind of building blocks to how we want to define managing up, and we'll open up the discussion to everyone else after we do the next few slides. Take it away, Dana.
Thanks, Jared. So one of the most famous books, and I encourage everyone to get a PDF of it or buy it, or the e-version, is called Throwing the Elephant, Zen and the Art of Managing Up. And an idea called Feeding the Elephant is from that book. And that's really considered a classic, or the easiest read go-to for managing up and introducing yourself to the idea of how to work with someone as your boss, supervisor, even leadership of the entire organization. But feeding the elephant means that you're gently solving problems and feeding good ideas up the trunk of the elephant, up the chain of command, feeding them nice little peanuts and snacks and good ideas. And successfully managing up is really based on looking at the person you're trying to influence and getting familiar with that person's goals and asking, how will my ideas benefit this person and this organization? So it's really about finding, aligning how you communicate and aligning the goals that you have for your department, if that's different than your supervisor, and how those align with the goals of the agency. And the second point being that words really matter. There's a slightly too common joke that leaders of volunteers are called cat herders, but the words that we use to describe ourselves and our work, they make a really big impression on how the rest of our team, and especially our boss, perceives us and the agency's volunteers and the value of the work that we're doing with volunteers. And there can be a tendency to have, oh, ha, 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 we're cat herders, but that's very negative and low value meaning and connotation. So I'm going to invite everyone to shift your own thinking and shift the way you speak about yourself. And think of yourself as conductors of an orchestra, of very skilled individuals, or if you're not into music like Jared and I are, train conductor, but you're in charge of, you know, a well-oiled machine or a group of highly trained, individually talented people. And that little tiny change in word, it doesn't seem like much, but it actually really strongly impacts and instantly shifts the perception and respect of our work on that higher level. We're kind of retelling the story and shaping the language. And leveling up, not just for video games, which are fun, and I'm sure Jared and his kids do all the time, but leveling up is a way, as you're managing up, leveling up is showing and telling your value and the value of the teams that you're managing to your direct boss, but also sometimes to the higher up. And it shows if you're at a meeting or in a performance review or whatever opportunity you have, plant seeds of ideas of how you're succeeding, how you're thinking about the future, how you're planning things to benefit the department, to benefit the agency, to align with the mission. And what that does is it shows that you've really been seriously thinking of how your leadership benefits the agency and the mission of the agency. This is especially a good tactic to use if you are if there's been some reorganization and you're not sure what's going on with your position, you want to advocate for it, or in best case scenario, there's a chance for a promotion, a raise, an elevation of your status. That's a great way to just kind of keep planting seeds and toot your own horn a little bit. Don't be afraid of that. One of my favorite phrases for anything in life, but especially work, is strike while the iron is cold. And what that means is it's best to address an issue or a potential problem before it gets hot or out of hand or emotionally charged. If you catch a problem or a potential issue early and you address it in a calm and a neutral way, that one avoids a much more difficult conflict or conversation later. But again, it's a great way to demonstrate your leadership and your abilities to be among the deciders in your organization. Next slide, electric slide.
I'm sorry, Dan, I'm going to jump in for just 1 second. And Lisa, if you could go back to that last slide.
Reverse.
Sorry.
No, you got it. Go ahead.
I just want to help synthesize for myself some of what you said, and two things that jumped out for me about numbers 2 and number 3. Words matter. Level up, show your value. And one thing I want to mention is, you know, there are 2 internationally recognized certifications for volunteers. Both are governed by the same organization, I believe now, right? CCVA and then the hospital version. But they both, part of becoming a certified volunteer administrator is advocating for the profession. And so that happens first and foremost within your own organization. And this is the spark that kind of leads to that global advocacy. And then the level up, show your value. The more you are able to do that, you're building value into not just your own job security, but your program. And it's harder for them to take that away later. So for the next person that's jumping in and building on your program, your hard work, that's important as well. So those 2 things really resonate with my own experience. And I just wanted to throw that out there as kind of a quick little wrap up to that. And Dana, please, next slide.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And the CVAs that Jared and I have after our names, and the CAVS, the CAVs that Joan has, speak to those two types of certification. And there's really, you don't have to, you're not in this alone. You don't have to invent a new way to manage a boss. And there's already, what we're talking about today just kind of skims the surface, and we'll have a chance to chat about it. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've already got some great best practices around managing up and kind of advocating for yourself. And the most important piece to me is understanding communication styles, both your own and your boss's. And there's really 4 points on a graph that you can think about, or 4 extremes of how people communicate or how their personalities work. And one is a driver who kind of likes to control things and be at the wheel. Another is expressive, where you're a storyteller and you really want to wrap it into a narrative and tell a story. Another is very analytical and logical. Another is amiable, where it's very emotional. And people are on different points in that scale. But some of the biggest conflicts that I've seen, and I'm sure Jared and Joan can speak to this too, are where, as leaders of volunteers, many of us, not all, but myself, speak for myself, I'm more of an extrovert, emotive storyteller. I have a little bit of a drive, but I'm not, I've had to teach myself to be more analytical and logical in order to have that conversation with a lot of my bosses, where they're thinking about numbers, graphs, money, bean counting, budgets. They're thinking in different ways, and they're communicating in a different style than mine. And I've had to often adjust how I feed the elephant and how I share my ideas in the communication style that they get. Otherwise, it doesn't, they're like, oh, Dana's here with another big flowery story. It's like, nope, I'm here with graphs, I'm here with logic, and here's the story of how this improves the agency and the work that we're doing with our volunteers. And that leads directly into active listening and mirroring language in meetings, making sure that you are really getting each other's points and actively listening rather than waiting to speak. And practice of active listening and mirroring language includes asking clarifying questions, again, remaining emotionally neutral and factual, and being really careful to listen to hear not only their main point, but any subtext that might be there, and not just, again, wait for your turn to speak or only think of your ideas. It's really a very two-way street, give and take, and active listening is genuinely rare. I've had training in it. You can have entire workshops just about active listening, but even just reflecting back with what someone says to make sure that you're really getting it is a huge help, and that also helps people feel valued and heard, which we'll get into as well. Thanks, Jared. Next slide, into Joan's. Speaking of perfect segues, here's Joan. Joan, are you unmuted?
Joan, while you're getting unmuted, I'll mention that this is not a map of New Hampshire.
Close.
I grew up in Vermont. That looks like the Connecticut River right there, but you know.
Well, I saw this and I thought, this is perfect. I want to say hi, first of all, to my East Coast and California friends in particularly, and also give an acknowledgement to that we do have people here on the call from Canada, which is a national health system. It's a different type of organizational structure than we have here in the United States. But I still think the managing up issue is, because we've worked with a lot of Canadian hospitals, is still the same. I mean, it's very much a personal experience for everybody. But if you think that, those of you from Canada, that you think that any of what we're talking about is different because of how your health system is organized, if you put that in the chat box, that would be helpful. We do have everybody on the call from healthcare so far, so I'm pretty confident that we're all working in the same, with the same mindset. You know, at the end of my career, Dana and Jared are in the midst of their careers, building their careers. And so I have a different take and a different perspective on this. I've worked a long time, and I've seen how the healthcare sector and industry in the United States has changed. And so when it comes to managing up, I'm very conscious of it because I've had my fair share of battles and successes. I made my way within the healthcare system to a vice president level, you know, so, and then it came crashing down many times during the course of my career, back up again. But one of the things I want to say about managing up is it's a head game, it's mindset. There are skills involved, and Dana mentioned all of them, but for me, it's always been a head game, because when you're working with volunteers in an organization, it depends on the size of the organization and what the mission of the organization is. Hospitals and healthcare, the mission, the use of volunteers is not part of the mission of healthcare for the most part. There are very few organizations that have the use of volunteers written into their mission, vision, and values. And so when it's not that clear, when you're not that clear of a player in an organization's mission, vision, and values, which, by the way, you are in some of the other health-related organizations like American Health, Red Cross, they vocalize and spotlight that volunteers are their service delivery mechanism. Hospitals, they don't. So we've kind of, that's a challenge, you know. If you're a nonprofit hospital, the only justification at this point for using volunteers is to maintain your nonprofit status and fill out that line 6 on the 990. That's what it's boiled down to. Healthcare has become the largest employer. So we didn't used to see those words 20 or 30 years ago, the largest employer. So now money, politics, power, employment, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, physicians, all of that lingo is what you hear when the public reads about hospitals and when your peers talk about hospitals. But our challenge always is in managing up is how do we incorporate both gaining support for volunteer involvement, which is one thing. And then the second thing with managing up is gaining support for your own personal professional development within the organization. And how do you find the steps to do that? You know, what does that look like? What does that mean? It's always a struggle up, and that's why I like this image. It is not an easy path. In fact, I would like to say that in the course of my career, I probably spent half of my time managing up, literally, and half of my time serving, creating programs, and creating value. So I want you to have your head in the right place here. You know, yes, you can gain skills. Yes, you can go to training about communications. You have to do that. But this is hard work, particularly in healthcare. And I don't know if it says hard work in Canada, and I'd love to hear if that is the case or not. I've always found in managing up, the people that mentored me the most or got it most, got the message about the importance of involving the community and volunteers are the ones that retained the purity of mission in their approach to their work. They truly were and are concerned about their neighbors, their patients, their coworkers. They are not attracted by, or at worst case scenario, consumed by the money, the power, and the politics. And so if I had one bit of advice for you with managing up as you go forward in your careers, is to find people within your organization that share the purity of the mission that you do, and don't get caught up in money, power, and politics, but learn how to deal with those who are caught up in money, power, and politics because of the immensity of the healthcare systems that we have now. 30 years ago, we didn't have these big systems. Now we do. So this is just a little image that I wanted to share with you. And if you can go to the next, I hear you, Jared. If you go to the next slide.
Before we get into this, we are going to take a poll question because they're relevant to the discussion, and I don't want to do them all after the discussion.
Okay, good.
So the first question is, are you at the table, or do you feel at the table when your organization is doing strategic planning or creating other programming or making other big decisions? And panelists, feel free to answer as well. And Lisa will let us know, or maybe message me when the results are in, and then she can pop them up on the screen.
Yeah, I gave folks a couple minutes to answer the questions, and I see a bunch of people have answered, but I'm going to give it another couple minutes, and as soon as they're done, I will pop it up on the screen, Jared, but why don't we let Joan continue in the meantime?
Yeah. Exactly. Let's go ahead and have Joan jump back in and take it from here, serial supervisor syndrome.
Yeah. And so as our organizations have grown, by the way, I want to say one other thing. Can you go back to that managing up slide, Lisa? Do you mind? When I look at that slide and when I hear the talk about managing up, there's a little something that goes off inside of me, and it's like a warning bell, because we're assuming that we're always at the bottom of the heap. And so not all our peers are always going to be at the bottom of the heap, and that's what I was trying to say before. It is a constant struggle to manage up in the volunteer sector. It's not a constant struggle for physicians to manage up. It's not a constant struggle for even our fundraising peers to manage up the way we have to do. So I want you to understand, again, that this is hard work. When it comes to managing up using this chart, also, you know, I've heard so many times, for example, when a hospital is being renovated, and all the renovations are done, but they've never included the volunteers in the renovations, and they hand the plans over, and all the volunteer assignments, like at the information desk and some other crucial area, the gift shop, were never taken into consideration. That's managing up, you know, and that's the hard work. How does that happen? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And it happens, I think, because, for many reasons, but we've had, I don't know how many of you have been victims of serial supervisor syndrome, but I have, and in healthcare, it's a huge issue. I don't know if we have a poll question, but one of the questions I had for you as a group is, how many immediate supervisors have you had over the past 3 years in your same job? No one quite knows where to put the volunteer department in the org chart. These are two managing up issues. You find volunteers placed all over the org chart. It's particularly in large systems. And then you find supervisors coming in and out that don't know how, the first thing about volunteers, and are assigned supervision of the volunteer department. These are challenges. This is all part of the mind game that is thrown into your lap to challenge you. This is all part of that 50% of the time I was saying you could hypothetically spend just trying to find your personal place within the organization and a place for volunteers within the organization, prove your value, and connect as part of a team within the organization. So I can't see the chat box. Has anybody added into the chat box how many supervisors they've had over the past 3 years? Can we see that?
No, there's been no responses.
Okay, good. So if you are, if you have had a series of supervisors, I want you to appreciate, and if you haven't already,
great,
the fact that that really does affect the nature of your personal and your department's organization.
Hey, Joan?
Organization. Yes.
So Joan,
I'll ask that whole question next, but let's, Jared, do you want to share the results to this one? Do you see them?
Yes, thank you. I was just waiting for an appropriate time to interrupt. So the poll questions have come back, and it looks like the vast majority of you feel that you don't necessarily feel that you have a seat at the table when it comes to strategic planning. So that's, you know, that's a perception thing for sure. You know, if you feel you don't, then that's a challenge to get over. But also some folks, it's, you know, it's going to be systemic or cultural, you know, that the coordinator level is just never welcome at that upper management discussion table. And so this is where that managing up is really important, because you do have influence over your direct supervisor. You can build that relationship, you can build that trust. So it looks like that also a number of folks answered C, that sometimes they do, sometimes, and that's good, that's a good step. And for a lot of hospitals and a lot of organizations, large ones, having some say at the table is a really big thing. So it sounds like that we're not totally bad in the sector, but there were definitely very few, only 2 that answered that they do feel they have a seat at the table. And I'll let you know I was one of them. So maybe just 1. Yeah. So in the next poll question, Lisa, if we could just pull that up now before we get back into talking, and then we'll have time to answer it while Joan finishes up.
I will work on that right now.
Great.
I have to also say, when it comes to serial supervisor syndrome, oftentimes we are not assigned. I don't want to sound Debbie Downer, because this has been my life, my career. So I get all this. I wouldn't have stayed in it if I didn't love it. But oftentimes, and as the systems have grown in healthcare, and as we become more business than nonprofit with our vision, the supervisors that have been assigned to our sector are not sometimes not the strongest and the most capable supervisors within the organization. So if you have a strong, capable manager that understands the purity of the mission, your chances of being able to manage up are a lot better. But if you're struggling to get on somebody's calendar, when you've written up something and they don't respond, when you pass it across the table and they pass it right back to you and say, fine, these are the managing up issues that are frustrating within the sector, but not that are solvable. I have to give you folks there. But recognize, again, as part of the head game, the serial supervisor syndrome is a problem. Okay, can we do this next poll, and then I'll do my last slide very quickly? Thank you.
Well, the poll's already been sent out, so we're just waiting for the results, which will come back.
And I apologize because I clicked end poll and cut somebody out who had just started it. So we're missing a couple responses because I made it a quick poll, but it is going to show up for you in 1 second. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So, it looks like, well, a lot of folks didn't answer, but the same amount of people that didn't answer said that they've only had 1 supervisor in the last 3 years, and that's good. Now, one thing I wanted to keep in mind also is in this economy and in this position, people jump around a lot, and so some people might have had 3 different jobs in the last 3 years, and that might throw those numbers off also, or they're maybe just considering, well, I've had 3 different, but I guess at this place I've only had 1. So that's something to consider, that the question may have some vagueness to it.
But I would be happy if we didn't have serial supervisor syndrome.
Yeah. Well,
pretty common.
It affects a lot. It affects a lot because you have to keep restarting, reteaching, reorienting, and you have to teach your boss what you do. It's really, there's an art to that.
Well, we're lucky that this group doesn't seem to be suffering from it as often as it can be seen in the sector.
Right.
It's good.
Right.
It's a cultural shift in our sector.
Yeah. And then the final question I have is, what is the true relationship or the true nature of your relationship with, I would only say, your immediate supervisor? Over the years, I counted last night, I went through my head and I thought, I wonder how many supervisors I've had over the course of my career. And I think I've had maybe only, I've been very fortunate. I've only had 3 jobs, and then I think I maybe have only had 9 or 10 supervisors. So I started categorizing, well, what kind of supervisor was that one? And what kind of supervisor was that one? And these are the adjustments that Dana was talking about. You have to adjust your communication style. You have to adjust, how you work with them, what their expectations are. And so in my informal analysis, I have had supervisors that were, I don't want to say enemies, but certainly couldn't care less about volunteerism. And I had to work with them for a lot of years. And how do you make that work? Even though it's the right thing to do, they don't agree. It's not a priority. And so you know it's best, though, for your hospital, for your patients. It's that purity of mission. And so that takes a lot of energy. And you have to have your head straight that I'm going to navigate this and make this work because it has to for the benefit of my community, my hospital, my peers, and the volunteers.
Joan, I'm going to interrupt just a moment because we've got a display issue on the screen. I don't know if it's affecting everyone, but there's big green boxes on the screen. But also I want to just recognize the time. We should move on to the next slide if we can get a chance.
Yeah, I already did. There it is. So I already started talking about the true nature of your relationship. So here's the question I have for you, and you can answer this yourself. Is your boss or your, I almost hate the word boss, is your immediate supervisor your friend? There are good things and there are bad things about that. I chose not to ever try and be friends with my immediate supervisor. Complicates life in the long run. I had one that literally came out and said, I really want to be your friend. Let's go do things. And got to take that. Don't do it. I don't. Are they your enemies? Are there people that are really out to get you for whatever reason? And so you'll know it when they are your enemies, that's for sure. Do they share your values? And so you can't change people's values. How do you therefore, if they don't value volunteers, make them value volunteers, make them value you, make them value the input of the community and make them understand? How do you make them do that? I don't know if you can. You just have to accept kind of like a working relationship that is better than nothing, you know, but you're never going to convert them totally, and you got to learn to live with that. And that's a whole workshop right there. Yeah. And then, do they share your personal interests? And do they recognize you and your work and volunteers? These are questions I was thinking about last night as I thought about the qualities, good and bad, of the supervisors that I've had. And I've only had one true mentor. And if you can find one true mentor that can help you with those steps of managing up, I don't know if any of you have been fortunate to find one, but I have found one. She was my first boss at Red Cross, and she just died in 2014, and we stayed friends, talked every week. She was a fantastic mentor. And so that's the ultimate. If you can find a true mentor within your organization to help you position yourself and the volunteer department on that road up to managing up. So think about what is the true nature of your relationship as it stands now with your immediate supervisor. And going forward, always examine that and about that, because it's not an automatic answer. It changes by the person, it changes by the program, it changes. There are a lot of things that can change it. So, mentoring up. Final words on that. Again, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but when I hear managing up,
I'm sorry, are you on to the next slide?
I don't have a next slide. I'm summarizing. But
Gotcha.
the last thing I want to say about managing up is there are so many factors that affect managing up, particularly in large organizations. I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think about a lot of women in healthcare and men in management positions. I think about team concepts, you know, is managing up in that step chart almost an antiquated managerial tool? Or how has teamwork and healthcare, particularly since COVID-19, at least they're saying they are leveling the playing field and removing the silos and creating sociocratic models, you know, where they're members of teams. So how important now is managing up? I don't know the answer to that, but these are just they're my thoughts, to share wisdom. There are some barriers to managing up that are built into the system, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are some positives that hopefully are being built into the system, like stronger team concepts. And then, again, what is your role and how do you gain support for volunteer involvement and also for your professional development and personal value to the organization?
On that note, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and say we got the results from the poll, and it looks pretty evenly spread out, mostly 13% answers and one 17%. I actually can't see, I don't know if I can't read the actual answers now, and I didn't memorize them all, but they're.
I can help you.
I'm
sorry.
At the top down to worst, worst at the bottom, and then we had a large portion that didn't answer.
So we had, how would you rate relationship with upper management? We had 3 say that they're one team. They are upper management included. I'll put it that way. 3 other people said it's great relationship, but I'm not always at the table. 3 people said it was good. 4 people said, it's okay, but I wish it was better. 1 person said other, and 9 people didn't answer. So the great news is that no one said they don't know who we are, and I don't know who they are, and no one said it was very negative.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everyone for participating in the polls. I do want to remind you that we are happy to take questions. We've got some time left. So as we, wrap up this part of the discussion, the next part is dependent on the questions and comments you have. We also would be welcome to any examples of managing up that you've had success with, because quite frankly, you've got 3 panelists here, but you have a huge pool of talent on the call. So I'm really happy to take any of those, and I can kind of assign them to Dana or Joan, or if there's anyone else that's appropriate to answer, we can do that.
And Jared, do you see in the chat that it's probably going to come up anyway, but HCAPS, HCA-HPS is a way to position the importance of volunteer programs. Might be mentioned, or it might organically come up in the questions, but we have that as a startup topic.
You want to talk about HCAPS?
Well, they're just like the Form 990 and putting the number of volunteers that the hospital has. This is United States, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize to Canada. I don't know about that.
We apologize to Canada for a lot of things, but go ahead, Joe.
990. What are the sticks that you have if you need a stick to justify or to help you manage up or to help you teach the importance of volunteerism in your department, and what is the value that they bring to the organization? As part of the HCAPS answer, one of my bosses at the hospital, where I was a director of volunteers years ago, yes. Just
for folks who don't know, why don't you quickly say what HCAPS is? Because I'm sure our Canadian friends have something similar.
Okay. So I'll tell my boss story first, and then I'll get HCAPS. But I worked hard. Our department did not have an annual report. And nobody was asking for one, but I thought we have to have an annual report to show what we do. I don't care if anybody's asking for one. I'm going to have one, and I'm going to publicize it. So I gave it to my boss, and I flipped it across the table. I said, here's my first draft of the annual report for the volunteer department. And he looked at it, and he flipped it back. He didn't even read it. He looked back, and he said, make it 1 page, show me the money. Next. I mean, I'd worked hours. And he was a mentor to me, So what is of value? And for him, it was showing the financial impact of the volunteer department within the organization, its current and its potential. Now, HCAPS is the scoring mechanism that came into the hospital or organization scene when the Affordable Care Act came around. Which affects hospital reimbursement from the government for Medicare patients. So you want your scores to be high because most hospitals, a very large percentage, some as much as 90s, many, a third of their income comes from Medicare reimbursements. And there's a survey that's put out and given to patients and your scores need to be within certain parameters in order to get the reimbursement you need, simplifying it, from the government. Now, those questions, there's a standard number of questions on the survey, but then there's also the opportunity to add additional questions that spotlight certain parts of the patient experience. And one of the opportunities that most volunteer leaders have within hospitals and healthcare is to try and manage up to get a question in that survey, in the optional questions, about their experience with volunteers. Now, some have had success with that. Now, that's called managing up. Then that you're incorporating who you are, what you do, into the patient experience in today's environments. So I'd be interested to hear if any of you have been able to do that, to get HCAHPS questions into your surveys. Or the other thing, in the standard set of questions, oftentimes patients will say, I had a great experience with volunteers at the front desk. So you're always searching for that. So there's a tool for managing up for you. Who do you work with on HCAHPS? Have you gotten any questions in the HCAHPS? How does the feedback come back to you, and how do you feed it upward, managing up, to incorporate volunteerism into a very core measurement tool that the hospital values? The other thing is social media managing up. There was a question earlier among our panelists about who uses social media and who doesn't. And so the answer was, you don't have control over social media. Most of your social media posting or communication would be through the communications department, but that's an example of managing up. What are your relationships like with communications? How can you sell to them that you need a weekly post on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, about volunteerism? And these are kind of like informal measurements of success of how you're managing up. The HCAHPS, number of volunteers in the 990s, social media. So start thinking about this, and that's the purpose of this workshop. Get your head in the game. It could be.
I'm going to jump in and add one more thing to that, because you're starting to talk about that managing up beyond your immediate supervisor, and if you find that's the case, then you're starting to really step into, as I think systemic or cultural challenges within the organization. So if that's the case, if that's your big challenge at all, up for any change, then managing up to your immediate supervisor isn't going to have a huge impact on that. But that's not what we're talking about today. Anyway, we're talking about that using your leverage as a volunteer coordinator to promote yourself and your program, build that influence, and work with your manager to help be that voice for you if you don't have it already. But the other thing I want to mention, I mention this on almost every call, is there's something called Service Enterprise. It's from the Points of Light Institute, and it really does. It's a certification. I'm not recommending or suggesting that you go get it, but if you go look at their web page for Service Enterprise, there's a whole list of values that organizations that work well with volunteers. There's a whole list of added value. So you make a third as much revenue if you have great volunteers. You get more donors, so on and so forth. It's lots of great information. But a document like that, again, don't reinvent the wheel. A document like that, you can say right to your manager, hey, pass this up. Let them know that this actually has some value to it beyond just tugging at the heartstrings and things like that. This has economic value to our hospital, which will get their attention.
I think on that note, what's key, Jared, is the one thing I would worry about is throwing too much information at your upper management. You want to give it to them in small chunks that they can absorb, because sometimes when you send them lots of things to read, they don't read any of it. So that kind of goes to the...
I couldn't agree more. That's why this infographic from Points of Light, it's just one page with like big numbers and some really clever pictures, and it just shows you, it speaks their language. I mean, that's the whole idea of Service Enterprise, is to build that volunteer engagement at every level of the organization. And so, again, you don't have to go through the certification to read the top 10 things that strong volunteer organizations have. that document plus the infographic.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I think that goes right to Joan's story where she gave her boss this lovely long report. Bosses want one-page executive summaries.
And when she said that, that's exactly what I thought of. Oh, she had included that service enterprise thing, because it's just generic information that Deloitte picked up, from surveys over the years. So it's standardized information that speaks across the volunteer sector,
and it's an example of the integration of business practices into a nonprofit setting, and sometimes that doesn't happen as easily. In other words, Deloitte, Service Enterprise is fantastic, but annual reports, purity of mission, taking care of patients, sitting by their side while they die, holding their hand. How do you manage up and bring those two together? So this is always going to be the tension. Wes from Canada was saying, and here's the elephant in the room too, how are we going to bring back, will we bring back volunteers after COVID-19? And how will that look like? What will that look like managing up? Who's having that conversation? Who's reaching out to you to bring them out? Anecdotally, I've only heard that our peers are reaching out to say, we want to come back, what do you want us to do? In some cases, so that's good. But COVID-19, how are they going to come back, and how are you going to manage that process from top to bottom now? That's a question out on the table again.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the poll results. We asked about, do you put together some sort of annual report to share the successes of your program? And it looks like, we had a handful of folks that do, which is fantastic. I would love to hear from you in the chat box about what that looks like. Is it a one-page document? Is it something else? Is it numbers-based? Is it, something else? So, and then we had a lot of folks that said yes, but to number 2 there, the letter B. And I actually don't know what the rest of that one was.
I'm
yes,
sorry again, Jared. I think you can make the poll box larger. See if you can extend it.
Oh, yeah. I tried earlier, but I can't do that.
All right, well, I'll help you here. One was yes, but I don't know if it tells upper management what they want to know. Because a lot of times they want to know ROI. They want to know how many people you saw, how you helped save money, or that type of thing. And 4 people said, yeah, but I don't know. 3 people said, yes, I do an annual report, but it's way more warm and fuzzy than maybe, again, the bosses want it to be. 4 people said no, and we had 9 no answers. So really the question is, I think, again, finding a good template or a good best practices for a powerful annual report. And I wonder if any of our clients have some that they would like to share with other volunteer organizations, because they think theirs is a great example. And again, we'd love to see those.
And while we're waiting for anyone to chime in the chat box with an example like that, I do want to mention that every year there's a new figure published that is essentially the median, or I guess the average volunteer value per hour. And so this is taking everyone that's, sweeping floors to performing surgery, that as long as they're a volunteer, they find the kind of medium value, I guess. At any rate, it's usually around 22, 23 bucks. It goes up and down a little bit. But even if you did one thing for upper management and just report the number of volunteer hours you have times that hourly rate and say, we received this much in-kind donation this year, there is value to that for grants, for your 990, for all those things. So even if you do just one thing, calculate that value in dollars for your management, and if that's the only thing that gets through to them, it's again, speaking their language.
And that's an independent sector. I just want to give a shout out that if you look up independent sector, it has both the national average of volunteer services value per hour, and it also goes state by state. And some of the coastal states and the bigger cities definitely skew higher, I believe, because I just had this as a recent report with clients and colleagues. I believe California is up to about $28 an hour as an average. And again, that's an average. You can also tweak, yes, and what Jared said, and Joan might agree, you can also directly tweak those numbers to the activities, the comparable activities that your volunteers are doing in your sector. The one warning flag for that is to make sure that it's not framed in a way that makes staff fear for their jobs. That it's, this is supplementing and participating as an entire team alongside staff, and it's not meant to support the argument that, a paid person's going to be replaced.
Dana, and that brings me back to supervisors and the upward managers, understanding that if you're a nonprofit, it's not a choice about using volunteers. It's
Right.
not a yes or a no. It's a yes. You have to in order to maintain your nonprofit status. We've gotten to a point with a lot of the business perspective and our supervisors not really understanding what a nonprofit does, believe it or not. And so it doesn't amuse me. It irritates me that we have to think that we have to teach them that, I don't know what they're thinking, that they can not use volunteers, which brings me back to COVID-19. And I'm wondering, and I'm looking at, and I haven't seen, and I'm sorry again for our Canadian friends, I haven't seen if there are going to be any exemptions to community benefit statements that hospitals have to fill out, those that are nonprofit, as a result of COVID-19, where they haven't done the community benefit requirements, including using volunteers for the Form 990. There have been exemptions lifted in other sectors like hospice, Medicare, Medicaid. You have to use 5% of your workforce has to be volunteers. They lifted that. The government lifted that. Now, I don't know if they'll ever put it back. These are the kind of things we have to look at going forward. So when it comes to annual reports, statistics, COVID-19, that's a whole nother workshop about managing up and having those discussions upward within your organization. What's this going to look like with volunteers? I think the timing is right now. Enough time has gone by where I think they can wrap their brains around volunteerism and what the future of volunteerism looks like for your organization. It's a good conversation to have.
I'm going to add that I tried to type Dana's site in here. The computer wouldn't let me cut and paste it. So it's not quite right, but if you go to independentsector.org, you should be able to find volunteer time. There's supposed to be slashes between those words there.
And I don't know what those numbers are going to look like going forward because of the absolute cessation, almost, of volunteerism for a whole year. So going forward, what's that record keeping and reporting going to look like internally within your own organization? And what value have you provided this year? I mean, these are things I'd be asking, and what are you going to say?
And I think one of the things that VSys can help you all with is that our software can help you calculate these dollar amounts automatically. And in fact, that's what Melissa Bergen, our Vice President of Training, will be doing our technical webinar on next month. So if you want to get some good hard data from your VSys system that you can use in these reports, stay tuned for next month's webinar. Sorry, had to do the quick commercial.
No, that's all right. I'm going to jump in and say one more thing. That's a fantastic feature. I've never heard of that on any software, so kudos to VSys for doing that. But you can also use that information to almost reverse engineer this discussion. So if you don't have volunteer numbers from this year, you can take the last couple of years, if you have record of them, plug it into that calculator, and then you can say to your manager, hey, we lost $25,000 worth of in-kind time this year, which is, and use that argument. So, talk about what you lost this year from COVID, and it might help remind them how important volunteers were before this and how they're part of the future of the organization as well.
And then managing up also, I was reading this morning that the American Hospital Association said that hospitals have lost 40% of their income. Sometimes I believe that, sometimes I don't. Depends on how they measure income. But that being said, they've lost 40% of their income. There's two ways to look at that. You can talk to them, managing up, have that conversation. Now's the time for us to bring volunteers back. They can be working in these other areas to help support areas where we have taken huge losses and can't recover. I mean, you know, these are delicate conversations, which goes back to Dana's information about the elephants and talking to you. But we're talking about not losing volunteers, but maybe shifting them, having those conversations to get them back to compensate for lost income. Danger territory, unions, all that, I get it, I hear it. Danger, danger, danger. But purity of mission. Are our patients, are our communities being served? That's what should be guiding this conversation. Purity of intent, not money, power, or politics.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and jump in because we are at just about at time, and I want to leave a moment or two. We didn't get any questions this time, or very many comments or questions, and we often do, so we want to give just another moment. If anyone had a burning question, please send it in right now. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa to go ahead and mention, as she just mentioned it, but in case you want to reiterate the dates for the next technical meeting, Melissa will be talking about that calculator we just referenced.
So I need to apologize because I don't have the dates in front of me, but it's generally the middle of each month, and you should be getting your email from us the first week of the month telling you what the webinars are next month. I'll also tell you that Melissa and I have been working hard on reviving our social media presence on Facebook and LinkedIn, because we're finding that people are asking us for information, and since we don't have the VSys website up yet, we're putting links to information on those on our social media. So we invite you to join us, we hope to see you next month for both our technical webinar and to talk more with the VSys. So in the meantime, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for being customers of VSys. You are very important to us, and we hope that we are very important to you and that we help you do your jobs better. And on that note, I will close us today. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.